Hi, I'm Charlie Balsam. I have spent 30 years in adult and marriage and family ministry. In that time, I developed two resources, one in marriage preparation and one in baptism preparation. And today I'd like to share a tool I created from research on family life that I've used with engaged couples and with young parents in baptism that's been found to be very useful. It's called the Christian Family Life Cycle. You pull it up. In this brief presentation, I want to accomplish three things. I want to highlight one instruction you will hear the church say to you in the rite of baptism about your vocation. I also want to locate the family story you are writing within the framework of the family life cycle, which has a very crucial element for you to know about. And then third, I want to connect the sacrament of baptism to your family story. Before we get to the family story you are writing, the rite of baptism will ask you first, what name do you give your child? And you will say the name. And then the minister, the priest or the deacon will ask you, what do you ask of God's church? And your response is baptism. God gives you and your child a second family called the church. So what does God's church ask of you? The rite of baptism says this: on your part, you must make it your constant care to bring him or her up in the practice of the faith. And then the rite shares with you 4-point guidance, 4-point ways, four steps, 4 ways to take in order to make it your constant care. First is to train your child in the practice of the faith. And this means prayer, Sunday worship, to follow Christian values in all aspects of your life. Integrity, keeping the commandments. This is God's desire for us, that we live with integrity. Third, to foster God's life means to cultivate God's love in them, and Jesus' invitation to discipleship in their vocation. And then fourth, and perhaps most important, spousal unity. Your marriage is the first witness to the existence of a loving God. So mutual support and cooperation as spouses is non-negotiable. Likely by the age of 7 or 8, your child will notice whether or not your faith is authentic. Do my parents really believe this stuff? So this at-home tool, this at-home study offers you a communication process to help you learn about baptism and your promises, and to discuss with each other the commitment that God is depending on you to carry out. So next we're going to look at the family life cycle path that you're on. We want you to spend some valuable time as a couple discussing what constant care and mutual support will mean for your child. Now, Jesus does not want your child's baptism just to be a church ritual. It's not magic. Baptism is the sacrament where your vocation and mission begins as Christian parents. Your vocation and mission are part of the marriage and family story you are writing. And like any story, there are chapters. So let's take a look at the chapter headings and notice the critical issue that needs to be accomplished in each chapter. You should have a detailed handout in your pocket folder, which you can look at later as a way to review in more detail the life cycle. But there's 2 ways that I would like you to think about it in order to understand its value. First is to think about how a child begins to walk. Babies arrive with the capacity to walk. They don't have the ability. So they have to do things like roll, crawl, sit up, pull up, take a step and fall. Gradually learns to integrate balance, motor skills, muscle development, and depth perception. So if she only works on motor skills and muscle development, will she be able to get around? Well, yes, probably stumbling, bumps and bruises. She will fully walk when she fully masters all the elements. In chapter 1, as single young adults, when you met, you had to learn to walk together as you head toward marriage. And the rest of the chapters are how you live out your vocation. The second way I think this life cycle path has value is to think about chapter 5, families launching young adults. Have you known of a family friend or a family member, a colleague or a neighbor who was married 30 years, 35 years, raised a few kids, and then in chapter 5, got a divorce? Other than severe abuse or adultery, why would a couple do that? What could cause a couple to drift apart while raising their kids? Ineffective communication, overwork at job or career, unhealed relationship wounds, resentments, maybe too much focus on the kids, wrong priorities, maybe they stopped dating, financial strains, maybe a lack of spiritual unity. All of these reasons as causes are preventable. But maybe they just never really mastered the elements of walking together. I think the family life cycle model provides an explanation of how you can walk together on this path, particularly as parents of children. So let's look at just the first 3 chapters. So again, you've got the same headings and the same critical issue. Take a look at each column. These are the basic tasks that you carry out to fulfill the critical mission that you have. Now, what I want to do is simply highlight a few things about these 3 chapters. In chapter 1, a single young adult prepares for 2 major life commitments: their vocation or their career and marriage. And 2 aspects of this chapter for a happy, healthy marriage are identity formation. Who am I? Why am I here? Am I mature enough to freely and knowingly give myself to someone in marriage? And then relationship skills. Healthy dating and engagement is so important so that instead of stumbling into marriage, we walk side by side, just like that baby learned to master the steps of walking. And 2 important aspects of chapter 1 for seeking your child's baptism is having a Christian core value system, and related to that, a choice of a spouse who shares and lives those values. The second chapter, marriage, the 2 most critical tasks are intimacy and communication, because these are so essential for bonding and having a satisfactory marriage. And then facing disillusionment. It's usually pretty normal. It can be kind of scary, but sometimes disillusionment leads to premature divorce. Why is this chapter essential for having your child baptized? Marriage is the basis for making it your constant care to raise up disciples for Jesus. In the 3rd chapter, families with young children. 3 critical issues in this chapter, I think, are religious affiliation. Why? Because you can't do this without God and His faith community. Parenting. Simply the question of, is it discipline or punishment? How you treat your child can affect their faith. And then retaining your marriage focus. Why? Remember about couples who get to chapter 5? It's very important. If by this chapter 3, you are significantly unhappy, your children are counting on you to renew and strengthen your commitment. You promised to do that in your wedding vows. So if you need to, get help. There's nothing more devastating to a child than being part of a divorce. The vertical dotted lines at each column are what we call transition periods in your story. And this is an essential aspect of the life cycle. 4 things to understand about transitions. First is there is a disruption in a period of stability. The chapter we've been in, as we've known it, is starting to change. We're leaving one chapter for the next. Typically, a pregnancy or an adoption study signals the beginning of a transition to families with young children. But a transition lasts about 6 months, 6 to 12 months on either side of an event, such as a wedding or a birth. Third, these are some typical emotions and feelings that we experience during a transition. We get into a temporary disequilibrium. We feel kind of off balance. And sometimes the stress and anxiety can make us edgy or worrisome, sometimes hard to live with. But that's completely normal in a transition. Fourth, and perhaps most important, is that transitions present us with dangers and opportunities. Why might there be a danger in a transition? If we're seriously stumbling as a couple, or if we're just dominated by stress, or if there's resentments from the current or previous chapter, the danger is if we avoid addressing these real issues and resentments and resolving them, because we will carry them into the next stage. But transitions offer us the opportunity to work through such issues, to work through disillusionment, and to look ahead, to revisit our goals, our priorities, our future plans. How are we doing? Where are we headed? What are we looking forward to? What are we hoping for? Can anticipate the adjustments and the changes that are coming, and make a vow to strengthen your mutual cooperation and draw upon the grace of the sacrament of marriage. So, what are some takeaways on this idea of transitions? Because they're important for infant baptism preparation. It's an opportunity. Transition is an opportunity to work through the normal stress mutually with mutual effort, support, and flexibility. And remember, one of the life-giving crosses of marriage is to keep working at it, even and especially when it may feel uncomfortable, difficult, or painful, because that's when the most growth is possible. Children need most from their parents that they grow their marriage and provide a loving home, steadfast love, forgiveness, and commitment. These are faith values, and they help raise up disciples. So let us return to the headings once more. 2 more things about the life cycle I want to point out. Each column has a spiritual mission. So the spiritual mission of column 1, chapter 1, the single young adult, is to acquire and share Christian values. The mission of the second chapter, marriage, is to have faith in Christ as your anchor in your marriage. The third is to have a Christ-centered marriage that anchors your domestic church. Fourth is to form a partnership your domestic church with your parish church for the faith formation of your children. 5 is your marriage is to send your young adults forth, perhaps to start their own life cycle. And then 6, to witness the joy, witness the memory of God's abundant love and mercy in your story. And across the bottom, this is how your marriage matures in each chapter through the mutual support and cooperation you give each other. You prepare, you establish, you strengthen, you solidify, you celebrate, and then you experience gratitude for your story. And finally, in the rite of baptism, Jesus and his church ask you to mutually support each other and cooperate with each other in raising your children and to make it your constant care. And to do this, you must be disciples. So I close with this definition of discipleship. This will appear in one of your worksheets. Just want to point out 2 things. Take a look at it. The word intimate means being vulnerable to Jesus' love, his mercy, and his influence in your life. Primary means it is first in importance, because discipleship is first about a relationship, not doctrine or teaching, as important as those things are. In the first place, your child learns about intimacy and vulnerability and loving relationships is from you, and no one can replace you. That's how important you are as disciples. In other words, an intimate primary marriage relationship will witness to your children the foundation of being Jesus' disciple. God wants to do this with you. Your parish wants to do this with you. And the rite of baptism is where God missions you to mirror his love as disciples to his newly adopted child. Recall St. Paul's words in the letter to the Corinthians, which is often read at weddings. It's about God's love for us. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. This is the love you and God bring to your child in baptism. Use this home study to grow deeper in God's love. In this home study, celebrate the chapters of your story and have important conversations as a couple, yes, about baptism and about the domestic church you are growing in this chapter of your story. As Jesus says in Matthew 28, go and make disciples.